It may be difficult for our younger viewers to appreciate the fear, even hysteria, of the early days of the AIDS epidemic. And 30 plus years on, many still don't fully understand the effort made by people and movements around the world to save lives and get action on the disease then and right up to today. Fortunately, David France lays out that history in his new book. It's called How to Survive a Plague, the inside story of how citizens and science tamed AIDS. And he joins us now for more. It's great to meet you. Nice to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
As I suggested in the intro, I think you got to be sort of 55 plus to remember what it was like 30 plus years ago when this story broke. Obviously, I covered it here in Toronto, but you were at Ground Zero in New York City. So let's start there. Set the scene for us of what life was like in the early 80s in New York City when this thing broke.
The first thing you have to know or remember if you're in our generation is that gay people, lesbians, gays, and transgender population were really excluded from the larger culture. And there were no protections in place. In the United States, it was illegal to be gay in 23 states in 1981 when the first reports of the plague hit. And it was illegal for people to enter the United States even as tourists if they were gay people. So we were in a kind of a prehistory, and the population, the gay community was very isolated and kind of inward looking when the virus hit. And because of that, there was very little coverage of what was obviously a mounting problem. The first report in the United States of the AIDS problem appeared in the New York Times on page 23 of the main section. And there it was a very short article explaining that 41 homosexuals had come down with a rare gay-related cancer, they were calling it at the time. So it was cast as a problem that was only striking a despised community. And that created really the whole petri dish in which this entire epidemic grew.
Well, that's the thing. I recall seeing, in particular, evangelical Christian leaders interviewed at the time saying this was God's wrath and revenge on a particular community for bad behavior.
Right.
When you heard that, I mean, what did that do to you?
Well, we knew that we were on the outside of culture and society. You know, we were outlaws, and we didn't expect compassion from the religious right, certainly, but it was a time also of great growth of the strength and power of the religious right. They had helped sail Ronald Reagan into office in 1980. And at first we didn't realize how powerful they were going to be on this public health crisis.
Powerful in what respect?
Well, they had control of Congress. They had influence in Congress that would make it much more advantageous for people in Congress to do nothing about the AIDS epidemic than to act on it.
So where you were looking for money to flow for research, they were basically, well, Senator Jesse Helms, for example, were filibustering.
Doing worse than that. They were just killing every bill that came along. He attached to every bill with AIDS funding in it what he called the Helms Amendment, which kind of colloquially was called the Helms Amendment for the next decade, that neutered and nullified any piece of legislation that was looking at raising money for AIDS research or HIV prevention campaigns, and he was doing it in the name of morality. And in the name of morality, condemning to death tens of thousands of people.
You point out it was 41 patients at first. I mean, do you recall at what point people started to realize, my goodness, this is not actually 41 people. This is, well, as one of your activists called it, as Larry Kramer called it, this is a plague. This is big. When did you realize that?
It took some time. You know, it was in 81, it could have been anything. It was not until 1983 that the virus was isolated, and because of a strange international battle of greed and opportunism, it took another 3 years after that for an HIV antibody test to make it to market. So anything between the first signs of the epidemic and 1985, 1986 was guesswork about what was happening. Once we had the test, we realized how vast and deep this epidemic had penetrated societies, mostly urban communities, all across Europe by that point, North America, creeping into Latin America, Asian and then endemic in Africa.
It was, I do recall at the time they were making a list of the people who were most likely to get it. And it was certainly gay men, intravenous drug abusers,
Right.
and Haitians. What'd you make of that?
They were called, there was another group, hemophiliacs. They called us the 4 H's. Heroin addicts, homosexuals. Well, those were the populations that were dying initially. And it took many decades for the Haitian connection to begin to make sense epidemiologically. And in fact, it seems, we know now, that when the virus first jumped from Africa, where it originated, it landed first in Haiti. That had to do with some sort of relief activity, refugee relief activity that was taking place between those two regions. And then from there up to the United States through gay men engaged in a kind of a sex tourism in Haiti, and then into the blood supply, which is why hemophiliacs became at risk for it. So, but it grouped us together, and only one of those groups deserved any sort of sympathy in the way Americans were thinking at the time, and that was the hemophiliacs, the so-called innocent AIDS patients.
There was a Canadian angle to the story, of course, because there was this French-Canadian flight attendant named Gaetan Dugas, who was known as Patient Zero. And he was sort of vilified at the time for having brought it from Africa, the story goes, to North America, and then the explosion after that. How did that get into the lore?
It was that very first year of the beginning of understanding what was happening. And many of the people who were still alive, who seemed to have this mystery illness, were interviewed by researchers and disease control experts. And Gaetan Dugas' name came up. Many people remembered him, who were the other AIDS patients at the time, from having had romantic relations with him. So he became kind of this mystery link to a lot of people. And at some point, a hypothesis developed that he was the index patient, the first person with HIV who traveled it. He happened to be a flight attendant through North America, traveled it to his ports of call. It made for a great story, and it's certainly, for people who wanted to fear how this disease was being racketed around the world, it made a compelling narrative. It turns out it was not true. He was, we now know, not related at all to the infections of the other people in the cohorts that they were studying at the time, by recent studies that went back and looked. But he became the devil of the epidemic and the personification of what was considered at the time a kind of an irresponsibility among the sick, and a way to continue to blame the communities of the sick for the illnesses that they're suffering.
Well, that went all the way up to the president. I do remember George Bush, the father, at the time saying, this is a behavior-based disease, change your behavior and the disease goes away. What'd you think when you heard that?
Well, he was about 10 years behind what was really going on in the community. Before anybody even hypothesized that it was a virus, the gay community came up with a plan for containing the epidemic, promulgated it among itself without any funding from any government authorities, and they invented something they called safe sex. Now, safe sex is a term we all kind of think existed forever.
No, but it didn't. It came from then.
It was actually invented and published in booklets and passed around so that people could understand ways to theoretically protect themselves. And what we see after the advent of safe sex in 1983, 2 years into the epidemic, and it had simultaneous creations in Toronto and New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles, this idea that condom usage and avoidance of exchanging certain bodily fluids might contain the spread of the disease. We see the indices of all sorts of other diseases dropping off remarkably. Gonorrhea collapses in the community, syphilis collapses in the community. We know that safe sex was taken up, and a really large-scale behavioral change took place within the community. So when George Bush years later says behavior is the problem, what our problem was at the time was that by the time the community adopted behavioral changes, some 50% of all gay men in major cities in North America were already doomed. And what the activists and patients and their advocates were calling for was funding for medication for the sick. And there's no way that a behavioral change can change that except the behavioral change of people like George Herbert Walker Bush and the people who are in the corridors of science who are not doing that work on an urgent basis.
I hear you, David, but humor me for a second on this one, because you're right. By the time he said that, the horses left the barn. Let's put this in its proper perspective at the time. AIDS blasts onto the scene sort of at the dawn, I think, or maybe not too far after the dawning of the sexual revolution, particularly in the gay community, where people are really, feeling their oats, and people are coming out of the closet. And it's fair to say there were far too many people having unsafe sex in the gay community at the time, right? That's okay to say, isn't it?
It depends on what time you're talking about, because certainly the sexual revolution comes to us from the 60s.
Maybe not in Toronto.
The Summer of Love, right, 1968, and thereafter, 1969, the beginning of the modern gay movement with the uprising at the Stonewall Bar in New York. And through the 70s, there was a sexual celebration and some would say hedonism in the community linked with the movement, a celebration of a freedom that had never been expressed or embraced. And at the tail end of that comes a virus.
Right. And it was attacked in this community too. I mean, we had the gay bathhouse raids on Yonge Street in Toronto.
I remember.
Which was quite a big deal at the time.
Right. So while the movement is trying to get, change the laws that were so discriminatory against gay people, they were acting in their sexual communities in ways that emulated a kind of a freedom. And it's in that world that this virus mysteriously landed. Now, I don't believe in any significant way that once the epidemic hit and was recognized as being a problem, that the community didn't maintain its vigilance. Mm-hmm. And I think we see that through all the data on sexual behavior in the community. As long as the information were promulgated and it was received. And so the battle for the community and for the movement, and we see that in this book, is how to get that information out there, how to reach the gay men who are most at risk. Remember, this was before social media. This was before fax machines. This was before computers or the internet. And slightly after smoke signals. So what we had was a campaign to put posters up everywhere and to find where gay people at risk lived and intravenous drug users at risk lived and try and physically reach them there.
Well, that was part of the campaign. I guess the other part was to try to get, in your country, Congress to flow money to the National Institutes of Health so they could find a cure.
Right.
To that end, tell us about ACT UP. What was that, and what role did it play?
So ACT UP is a kind of a newcomer to the political movement of activism that started right at the beginning. And it's a slightly younger generation, maybe a half generation younger than the activists that took to the ground in '81. It's 1987, 6 years into the epidemic, 500,000 people worldwide already dead. The president has just said the word AIDS for the first time, and he described it not as a scientific problem, but a moral problem. So
this is Reagan.
This is Ronald Reagan. We, as a community and as a movement, had no traction 7 years in, and no pill. You said they were looking for a cure. They were looking for treatment, anything, and nothing had been released. Think of it, 6 years of sitting and waiting for pharmaceutical companies, anybody, to at least try something. And the frustration was understandable and profound. And in early 1987, a group of people got together in New York to express their fury, and they formed the nucleus of what would become this international grassroots social justice movement around healthcare called ACT UP.
The answer to this may be obvious, but let's hit it on the head anyway. Why do you think governments, public health organizations, media in some cases. Why was nobody particularly seized of finding a solution to this problem?
Because morality was leading the day. It was a time where ideology encouraged the people that mattered in those categories that you mentioned to not have an ounce of empathy for the community. So it's hard to remember today. I mean, it really is hard to remember, except for maybe what's happening now in Washington in preparation for this new administration. But the first thing that ACT UP did and had to do was to make an argument in an effective way that people with AIDS were human and not, monsters, and they deserved what humans deserved. Still, by 1987 in New York, there was only one funeral parlor that would take bodies that had died of AIDS. There were doctors, right up until 1990, the majority of doctors surveyed through North America would not treat a person with AIDS if given the opportunity. There was still this idea that you brought it upon yourself, it's all just too much for me, it's going to burn out through your community, and then then it'll be over. And so that's what they started to do initially. And they started doing it by adopting interesting strategies like, there was one they called the kiss-in, and I described this in the book, where they would just kind of go to the front of a building or a hospital or inside an elected official's office and just kiss, to make people witness a gay kiss. 1987, there had never been a gay kiss on television. We had been excluded, like actually, barriers against the reflection of our humanity. And so it started breaking down and making people familiar, at least, with gay people, making people look at gay people, and then from there to listen to gay people. And the gay demand at the time was, give us a pill, give us a pill. And soon a pill came, and it was highly toxic. And
which one is that? AZT?
It was AZT, yes.
AZT, as you call it, yes.
Yes, and that pill wasn't enough, so they said, give us another pill, and there was no other pill, and no one had an idea for any of those other pills. And that began the development of this intensified strategy of the treatment activists on the ground to learn the science themselves, to become citizen scientists, to make themselves available as partners, sometimes unwilling partners, with the research scientists and the regulators who were identifying those new compounds, testing them, and bringing them onto the market.
And in effect, I guess, as the story is told in the book, it's not Big Pharma that leads the way, it's not the politicians who lead the way, it is the members of the gay community whose friends and lovers are dying around them and who they themselves are dying, who lead this push. What was the breakthrough eventually?
Well, eventually it was that what ACT UP did initially was to recognize that there was no national or international agenda for AIDS research, and there was no leadership in place. So they first tried to appeal to people to take on those leadership roles and to build that agenda. And when that failed, they did it themselves, and they brought that agenda to Montreal, to the International AIDS Conference, when it took place there, and presented it kind of guerrilla style to the scientists there. The scientists stayed miles away from these folks. They looked like bohemian gay folks from New York. They all wore earrings and long hair, and there was a certain look that was prevalent at the time of kind of army boots and T-shirts, and they looked very anathema to what these scientists were expecting. And but the document that they produced and presented there made a cogent argument and began to interest the researchers. And one in particular read this document. She was a medical statistician. She was in charge of approving the ways that drugs were being studied. And she read it, and she thought, at first she thought, well, they have no idea how drug trials are developed. And then she realized that they did, and that in fact what they were proposing was a way to study drugs that was more moral, that was more nimble, that was more urgent, and that could produce numbers in a quicker way.
What was it about the AIDS virus that made it so particularly virulent and therefore difficult to conquer?
It was the first of the retroviruses, as they're known, a certain class of viruses, to be identified to infect human beings. And at the time, it was believed that a retrovirus couldn't cause illness. This retrovirus is a wily a little thing. It genetically alters the human genome. It knits itself right into every gene and every cell of the infected host. And then it kind of eats the immune system until it's totally depleted.
So let's be clear, you don't actually die of AIDS. AIDS destroys your ability to fight off infection.
Correct.
And you die of something else.
You die of what they called opportunistic infections, the infections that would take you away if you had no immune system. And those included a certain rare form of pneumonia, a skin cancer called Kaposi's sarcoma, certain ocular infections that would render you blind before killing you. And there were 15 or 20 of these opportunistic infections that weren't, while the research scientists were looking for the magic bullet and the Nobel Prize that might find a way to wrestle HIV to the ground, nobody was researching the pill that might keep you from getting the pneumonia that was killing the majority of people, or the pill that might allow you to save your eyesight. And that's the area where this generation of activists, of science activists, first put all of their attention. Keep the people alive from the opportunistic infections while you're still researching for what ultimately would be the pill that might change this from being a plague of almost certain death to the possibility of survival.
And eventually, it's I guess, what do you call it, like a trifecta cocktail that worked.
It worked. It worked. And they were there, as I show in the book, at every step of the research in this new drug compound that was brought to market based on a drug trial protocol, which they themselves designed, the activists designed, presented to industry. Industry adopted it, and allowed this drug to prove itself in a much more rapid basis than any previous drug or drug class, and then come and within 6 months end the plague years of this epidemic in a really, really dramatic way.
But how many people had to die first? It's over 6 million, right?
It's certainly, right now it's 40 million, but at that point it was 6 million, and there were 300,000 Americans, and by that point 100,000 New Yorkers. And those New Yorkers were all seized from very small pockets of the city. If you knew one person who died in the plague years, you knew a dozen, or 24 or more.
There is an irony in all of this, right? I mean, the irony that the gay community internationally really found its voice and acquired political power because of this awful plague. I mean,
it's true.
Who knows if it would have happened without it?
I was looking at an old videotape of an elected official in New York arguing against making any sort of concessions to the activists. And he leaned into a microphone and he said, next thing, they're going to be coming to City Hall asking for a marriage license.
He was right about that.
It turns out he was right. So apologies to him. We all said, no, that's not it. But it turns out that it was a logical trajectory.
Let's just share some of the current stats on HIV in the U.S., courtesy of the U.S. government's AIDS.gov website. More than 1.2 million people in the U.S. are living with HIV, and 1 in 8 of them don't know it. Over the last decade, the annual number of new HIV diagnoses has declined 19%. Gay and bisexual men, particularly young African American gay and bisexual men, are apparently today most affected. How optimistic are you now, given the trajectory of the last 35 years? How optimistic are you that this thing someday will be history?
I am very optimistic. And it might not be in the short term, given, if we're talking at least in the United States, given the change of leadership there. It takes education. That same kind of educational money that Jesse Helms kept from the public health coffers. We have new tools available in the prevention of HIV transmission. And they are not being promoted. What we know with certitude is that people who are on effective treatment, people who are brought into care and are on these medications effectively, are virtually non-infectious. We don't have a campaign in the United States to go out and find those people. It's only 1.2 million, or whatever number you said, should be locatable. Bring them into care, and you end transmission. We also know that those same medicines taken by healthy people, by people who don't have HIV infections, render them virtually incapable of becoming infected with HIV. It's been approved, the use of the drugs in this way has been approved as a prophylaxis. So, we call it PrEP, but no pharmaceutical company is promoting it. They don't want to be seen as promoting a drug in that way. The US government has not put money behind a public health campaign which would protect those kids. You're talking about kids who are most at risk these days. They don't have the information to empower themselves. If we could reach them and put them, for the period of their vulnerability, say from their teens through their 20s, on this medication, and we create a kind of a pharmaceutical shield over them, they're not going to be catching HIV. But the ages 14 to 22, that's the biggest infection rate, gay, bisexual, and transgender kids, and they are spreading it among themselves. So that's where it is. How do you find that group? How do you reach out to that group, and how do you get them messages of self-love, self-empowerment, and self-protection? And that takes a great amount of political will that still hasn't been garnered.
I want to ask you one last question. The button.
The button.
Who is that?
This is Marsha P. Johnson. She is, or was, the founder of the transgender movement back in the 1960s, and a great hero.
Why do you wear her button?
I think a lot about Marsha. Marsha Johnson launched the rebellion at Stonewall and was one of the founders of the modern gay movement. And I'm currently working on a documentary about her life.
I look for, put it this way, if it's half as good as the documentary you made about this, I look forward to seeing that one too, because this book and that documentary are both spectacular.
Thank you.
How to Survive a Plague, the inside story of how citizens and science tamed AIDS. David France, great to meet you here on TVO. Thanks so much.
Great to meet you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.